Today is April 1st in the year 2020. The coronavirus has taken a hold of our daily lives all across the world. We are in the midst of an interesting time in our history where we might have to contain ourselves within our homes for the foreseeable future, be that a couple weeks, a month, maybe even several months. So I wanted to speak to whoever is out there who might be listening. If you are feeling uncertain during this time period, if you don't know what to expect or how to proceed, I'm speaking to you. Part of what makes this time so scary is the sudden change to our daily lives. People aren't used to abrupt change, and this kind of interruption can create a tunnel vision where you can only see a few feet in front of you, like you're walking through a thick fog. How do we deal with this challenge ahead of us where we cannot see through to the other side? It's important to have perspective. A lot of the anxiety we feel can come from this daily hysteria where every new day it gets worse. More cases are reported on the news, more people lose their jobs, the stock market takes another volatile turn. But it's important to have perspective. When we experience this time period from the small scale of a week or two, where new fear is injected daily, it can feel overwhelming. But if we change the scale and zoom out, then you can look at the situation from a larger perspective. What you are experiencing now will not last forever. It will change and it will pass. Take a step back and look at this obstacle on a larger scale of time. Not that long ago, the US was about 10 days behind Italy in terms of the number of confirmed coronavirus cases. Now, the US is number 1. That means we are at the very start of what is to come, and that can be quite frightening. But eventually, the wave passes. It will get better, and it will end. There will be fewer cases, there might be therapies and a vaccine, and the economy will eventually get back on track. Some of us may even lose our loved ones, or already have, and that grief will be incomparable and will change one's life forever. But even grief is something we each have the power to walk through to the other side. Though there is suffering now, compared to other parts of your life, this will be a relatively short period of time, and the fog will clear, even if it might feel overwhelming or suffocating while we walk through it. Once we remind ourselves this will pass, the struggle, of course, is enduring this difficult period in the meantime. In addition to the pressures of staying healthy, feeding and housing ourselves, we must adjust to the solitude of social distancing, self-quarantine, and the like. This sudden, deliberate isolation can be really frightening on an emotional and psychological level. But even if this is an uncertain time right now, and people are rightfully frightened about their health, the health of their loved ones, their ability to financially support themselves and their families in the coming weeks and months, there's also another way of looking at this. And that is to look at this as an opportunity. It is so rare for the entire world to be forced into taking a pause, to isolate, to take shelter at home. Silence can be incredibly disconcerting, but being alone and being isolated can actually also be a gift, a blessing, to look inside oneself and spend time with yourself. Life is always so busy. People are always running, they're always going somewhere. People are running to class or to work, and then they run home to do more work and don't sleep and don't eat well and are stressed out, and then they wake up and they do it all over again. And people are always tired because there is always so much left to do and so much that hasn't been done and so much to catch up on. And now, out of nowhere, there is this time that is being handed to you to be able to sit in one place and just take a moment to reset. So the topic of this talk today is how the isolation that we are experiencing from self-quarantine and social distancing is an opportunity for us to learn how to be with ourselves. So, all right, first, what exactly makes this change so weird and so disconcerting? First of all, we can observe physical differences in our communities. Social distancing has meant closing all the spaces we have in our societies that allow us to interact with our culture and with each other. The closures eliminate going to movies, shows, sporting events, and concerts, and removes the way we socialize and share space with each other at restaurants and bars, parks, schools, and offices. We've traded those spaces now for the confined spaces of our homes, and for many of us, apartments that were already too small. So since we can't go out and engage in that way anymore, and have all this time on our hands, the alternative has been to get the same entertainment and social fixes through online platforms, streaming movies and TV shows, being on social media, etc. And we know what this looks like, right? Sitting on our sofas, eating up our days with Netflix, and your body starts to slowly slink into this slouch, and you slouch so much that you just keep sinking down into the couch until you start becoming the couch, right? There are days I felt like I literally disappeared into the couch. But unfortunately, it can be very easy for this physical slouching into our couches to become an internal slouch, a slouch that happens inside us where, as we spend our days sinking further into a hole of coronavirus updates and memes, we also start to sink into uncomfortable feelings of laziness, feeling unproductive, feeling drained, feeling lonely, feeling depressed. Any disruption in routine can be off-putting, throwing you off-center. You can start to question your sense of purpose and drive to actually get up and live every day. Often without structure, we lose motivation and self-confidence, and when we are by ourselves too often, we can't distinguish between being alone and feeling lonely. When we are presented with the challenge of silence, the challenge of dealing with quiet time, time by ourselves, we can easily turn to Netflix and social media to fill in the quiet and distract us. But we aren't just looking for distractions because we are bored. We do this really to distract ourselves from ourselves. One night, I found myself going deep into the coronavirus hashtag on Instagram and reading through all these memes on Facebook about Zoom and empty grocery stores. And even if my house itself was quiet, the inside of my head felt so noisy. And so this isolation also seems to encourage a negative way of sharing space, which is to share it online through the news media and social media platforms, allowing our mental space to be inundated with noise, even if our physical spaces might be very empty right now. So how else can we take up and share space right now? I think it's important that we try giving our mental space the same kind of quiet that we now have in our physical spaces. During this time, we can find other ways to connect. We can find not only other ways to connect to each other, but also other ways of connecting to ourselves. One of, if not the greatest adventure of life, is learning about ourselves and growing into whoever it is we are to become. So, I'm putting my voice out there to anyone who wants to listen, so we can create a space here, a community dedicated to discussing ideas, exploring what it means to reflect on self-growth, and what are some books or films, works of art, or music that can help us along the way. Interestingly, these isolation measures haven't actually affected my mental and emotional life so negatively as I think it can for many other people. And a reason for that is because I've had other opportunities to practice being by myself. And not just by myself, but with myself. In between graduating from school and jumping into the next part of adult life, I had to take some time to think about who I was, what I wanted. Not just what I wanted to do, but who I wanted to become. This was difficult because it came with no structure and no routine, looking at a vast expanse of choices, but at the same time feeling like there are absolutely no choices. And that kind of abrupt change in routine and lack of structure can be incredibly disheartening and demoralizing, sending your motivation and your self-esteem into a nosedive. But what that period in my life has taught me is how important it is to take responsibility for your life. Learning self-advocacy, learning how to have agency, those are lessons you are never taught in a classroom, but have to learn by yourself. Knowing how to be by oneself without feeling lonely is a skill you have to learn and practice. When we are alone with ourselves, things come up, no matter who you are, no matter if you've had a happy and comfortable life, or if you've had a lot of identifiable struggles. And it's important to practice taking inventory of ourselves and our lives. But why is being alone so difficult? Why is it so frightening? I don't think many people nowadays know how to be alone in a healthy way. Depression and anxiety levels seem to be at the highest they've been in the United States. Right now, we are experiencing a global pandemic due to the coronavirus, but at the same time, there are other epidemics that are debilitating our country. There is a mental health epidemic in this country just as much as there is an addiction epidemic. But these struggles we go through aren't as visible as something like the coronavirus outbreak, since these other illnesses are happening inside our minds and are spoken of in hushed voices, too often shrouded in shame. But at some point, before loneliness and isolation turn into depression and anxiety, we have to reckon with the silence and find healthy ways to be with ourselves. Although many people are rightly focusing on immediate needs, their physical health and their economic security, the stress endured through this experience will have an inevitable toll on most people's mental health. So, I do not think it premature to begin having that discussion now. How to protect your mental health, even as we take measures to protect our physical health and the health of others. I think isolation is something we don't really talk about or like to admit. I think people are taught that they have to be strong, that they are okay on their own, they don't need people, they don't need anyone's help. To admit that you feel lonely takes so much courage because it's an admission of vulnerability in our society, and that is seen as a weakness. And yet, in reality, we all feel isolated at different points in our lives. And part of what makes isolation so painful to experience is the illusion we all believe that no one else is feeling the way that we are feeling right now. To the isolated individual, everyone else looks happy, productive, busy. Everyone is out and moving and talking and producing, and all this appears as a status quo that stands in such contrast to what the individual is experiencing, that perhaps we don't realize this is not even an accurate representation of the daily lives of most people. But right now, we are in a very interesting time where the isolation isn't coming from within ourselves and where we are in our specific lives, but rather an externally mandated isolation coming from our communities and our governments to take precautions because of the coronavirus. And so this is interesting because it upends one of the facets of the pain of isolation, which is that no one else is going through what I'm going through. Because in this situation, everyone else is in fact going through what you are going through, to varying degrees, in a visible, recordable, and observable way. We can observe that our streets are empty. We read emails of our neighborhood theaters and gyms and restaurants closing down. We hear the news updates to encourage social distancing and sheltering in place. Knowing that this is an external situation can perhaps help us deal with some inevitable emotional side effects and consequences of whatever lies ahead of us, however weeks or months that ends up taking. But the real opportunity here that we can mine is the opportunity to take this global pause and instead of trying to escape our isolation through binge watching Netflix and spending our days on social media, in other words, finding ways to distract ourselves from ourselves, we can instead explore and engage with our isolation and with ourselves. Ultimately, having silence provides the opportunity to reckon with oneself. It comes down to one terrifying question, and the opportunity to ponder it is part of what makes quiet time to be alone so disconcerting. I once had a professor who spoke about the British author Virginia Woolf and the questions she poses in her novels about the inner life, about what is going on inside ourselves. In describing the inner life, my professor would say, It is what happens when you leave the party and walk out alone into the night, and suddenly it is quiet and you hear that voice come in through the dark to ask, "Who are you?" Who are you? A pretty difficult question. It's a question we continue to ask ourselves our entire lives as the answer keeps eluding us. We have to sift through all these other narratives that are put upon us by the media, the culture we grow up in, the lives of our parents, the influences of our friends, the time we happen to be born into. There is so much noise that we each have to tune out in order to really listen to the voice within us. And even if we become skilled at listening to ourselves, your person is also constantly changing, and so yourself is constantly growing and expanding and filling out and acquiring layers upon layers, and so that question, "Who am I?" becomes a continuous process of reevaluation. Being alone can be so frightening because it provides us quiet time to hear our inner selves ask those questions it really wants to ask. Who am I? What do I want? Who do I want to become? Instead of seeing solitude as frightening, we can see it as a great opportunity to reckon with ourselves and through reflection take inventory of where we are in our lives. The thing is, this scenario is not unlike other moments in your life when you've been isolated or lonely. And I guarantee you, just as in the past you've had moments like this, you'll have periods in your life in the future where you might once again feel this way. When people are young especially and are starting out in life, they can feel a similar isolation, whether it's from not fitting in at school, or starting college far away from home and not knowing who you are yet, or entering the workforce and feeling all this pressure to start your life, or maybe you had to move to a new place for a job, or to leave the town you grew up in. We feel alone after a relationship comes to an end and you have to figure out how to get through the heartbreak. Or maybe you and your friends outgrow each other as you move through life, and that can also be incredibly isolating. This is not just a matter of practicing isolation, but practicing how to handle uncertainty. We lose people, we change our environments, we change ourselves, and change naturally can bring a similar feeling of isolation. But change also brings growth. It brings possibility for what can be gained, what is to come. People are resourceful, and people are resilient, and you were made to be able to adapt to change. You are changing and growing all the time in your physical body, emotionally, mentally. You were born with the capacity to handle and actually benefit from change. And the person who will carry you through all those moments of change is you. It is yourself. Your relationship with yourself and your ability to be able to be with yourself is your greatest treasure and a skill that if you hone, you will never lose out on. You can only gain from it. There are many other parts of life where we will feel isolated and will be forced to spend time alone by ourselves. So right now, during this period of social distancing, we can practice the skill, not of being lonely, but of learning how to be with ourselves. Our work lives have changed a lot in a few weeks. Millions of people are suddenly out of work. People who are fortunate enough to still have jobs have to figure out how to work from home. But for those who choose to, there is also an opportunity to actually do a different kind of work. A work that involves looking into ourselves instead of finding a distraction that will make us look outward. Looking inward and getting to know yourself, that is all work, just as much as going to your job or doing your homework is work. But it's a type of work that I think we don't really know how to talk about or how to value because it's invisible work. We can't measure it or observe it the same way we measure the other types of work we do. but it is still work and often much more difficult than we expect it to be. During this mandated global pause, I encourage everyone to take this opportunity to engage with our isolation by doing this invisible work and check in with yourself. Where am I in my life right now? How are my relationships in my life? Are there people in my life I feel connected to, who I want to love and support, and who love and support me? We can take this abrupt and sudden change by the reins and say, okay, what can I do here to make the most of this? I can't do things the same way I always did because my routines are gone, but what freedom does that give me? What other ways can I take care of myself during this time period? What other ways can I take care of and provide for my loved ones? Take a look at where your energy is being put into the most right now. What comes naturally to me? Where do I feel the most grounded, the most at peace with myself, the most aligned with my values and my external environment? The universe is abundant, and there is so much potential to create anywhere you are. And I think when people feel connected, when they feel connected to themselves, to other people, to the natural world, they will feel at peace and they will feel calm. And I believe that feeling can be achieved in your daily working life as well, and we should pursue that feeling. Finding inner peace and calm is perhaps never so needed as it is now. But that takes effort, it takes courage, and it takes persistence. Mental, emotional, and psychological balance and well-being does not have to be at war with our jobs or our environments. It does not have to be a state of spiritual privilege that only monks or priests or yoga masters have access to. It is there within you, even during a global pandemic, as long as you are committed to doing the invisible work. Even the worst tests in life are not determined by the circumstances foisted upon you, but how you choose to respond to them. And just remember again, the scope of all of this. You will have other adventures in your life. Our countries will get back on their feet. Business will reopen and jobs and economies will come back. In the meantime, just take it day by day and take solace in what is in front of you that you are sure of. Health when you have it, shelter and food if you have them, and family and friends if you have them. This is an opportunity to be curious and an opportunity to be courageous about the ways in which we care about each other and care about ourselves. There's that great song David Bowie and Queen sang together, Under Pressure, where David Bowie sings, "Love dares you to care for the people on the edge of the night, and love dares you to change our way of caring about ourselves." I think it's a poignant message that can really go to the heart of these strange times right now. The pandemic is exposing how all the people on the edge of the night are living, struggling to live, and how we might have failed them, and how might we be able to show love to each other, and also that message of love as a force we also have to show ourselves. Bowie also sings, "'Cause love's such an old-fashioned word." And maybe in this time, we can be reminded of old-fashioned ways of living, of our traditions, our families, staying local and thinking of our communities. To summarize, I think we can actually maximize on this time where the entire world is taking a pause inside their houses. Because when we are alone, we settle into quiet, and quiet can be disconcerting, and a lot of uncomfortable feelings might rise up for you that perhaps you were ignoring. But being patient with yourself while you're alone and having the courage to look inward and reckon with yourself forges inner strength and facilitates resilience. This is an opportunity for us all to look inward and reflect on ourselves, where we are in our lives, and changes we can make going forward to be more humane to ourselves and to the people around us. There are so many simple acts of heroism that are visible every day as doctors, nurses, and healthcare workers, first responders, police officers, firefighters, service members work to help others, and in many cases put their lives on the line to do so. Although the vast majority of people being asked to stay at home are doing their part to flatten the curve of this pandemic, until we are free to interact with others more broadly in person, we can use this time to better ourselves in solitude. This moment in time is good practice for the times in your life that will inevitably come when you do have to be alone, when you are quarantined or isolated in a different kind of way, not a mandated isolation from your community, but an isolation you fall into emotionally, psychologically, or spiritually. So let's make the most of this time and practice being alone in a healthy way and being alone with ourselves. So to anyone out there who's listening, take care of yourselves and each other. And if you want more discussions about all the other human stuff we don't get to see so much of in the media or in popular culture, come back, because in this podcast, we're going to continue talking about self-growth and inward reflection to give you something to get you through this strange time we're all going through. We'll have a lot of conversations on growth, mental health, friendship, meaningful relationships, heartbreak, love. And we're also going to explore some works of literature, film, music, and other art forms that can bring in something concrete we can actually engage with to help us make sense of all these ideas and help us do the invisible work we may be called upon to do in the weeks ahead. Sending out love and hopes for your health and self-discovery. Until next time.